So my number three is The Wedding Banquet from 1993, directed by Ang Lee, starring Winston Chow, Mei Chin, and Ali Gua. Quick logline. To satisfy his nagging parents, a gay landlord and a female tenant agreed to a marriage of convenience, but his parents arrive to visit and things get out of hand. I wouldn't call nagging parents, but sure, just
Yeah,
parents.
that's a bit harsh. I think, yeah, just
Yeah,
parents. I don't think they were doing
just
anything
parents.
super out of it.
No,
Well, I guess there
it's
was mainly
totally,
they want a grandchild. There was a little get married, have a grandchild,
yeah,
but I think nagging is a little harsh.
I agree. Yeah, which is all understandable
Yeah,
given what they're being put through, I
exactly.
suppose. So yeah, I had not watched this movie until the last few years. I mean, obviously we've shared a love of Ang Lee on this podcast. We've covered many of his films in the past,
Hmm.
but this was one of his earlier films, at least, his introduction to the international audiences. And I was kind of blown away by the movie, which we'll obviously get into. But for me, from a sharing of food standpoint, to me, this movie symbolizes, you know, even though you may be falling out of love with your family members, or you may be going through hard times, there might be pretenses and lies involved in how you're engaging with your family, but food still sort of brings you together. And food in this movie is such an act of not just sharing joy and love, but also, a gesture to show even in the hard times that I care.
Hmm.
And then obviously the ultimate kind of climactic moment of this movie is the wedding banquet where everybody gets together, and even though it's a crazy event, it's about this pretend marriage, like the logline said, between the son and his wife, which is the tenant. And the gay boyfriend, or the boyfriend, is playing the role of the photographer in this
Uh-huh.
banquet. And all families and all these crazy traditions and food and everything is part of it all. For a moment you almost get lost in the fun of it and the fact that we're all together. And even though this is a pretense, and even though the parents at some level know that something is off here,
Hmm.
you still go along for the ride. And I think a lot of that has to do with food and just breaking bread together.
Hmm.
So that's why I wanted to highlight this movie. But yeah, curious if you had seen this before, and what did you think?
Yeah, so it's funny. Like I thought I had seen this movie before. I could have sworn like I'd
Mm.
seen it, and then I rewatched it for this podcast and realized, well, maybe I've never seen this movie before, and I might have gotten it confused with Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which is a
Oh
film that
yeah.
I had seen in high school. So I want to say this must be the first time I'd seen this, and like we had mentioned earlier in the podcast, I am also a big fan of Ang Lee, so it was nice to go back and see one of his early works. If not, is this his first film?
I don't know. At least one of his earlier
Right.
movies that introduced him to an international audience, but I
Okay.
don't know if it's his first
Okay.
film.
Yeah, on the food piece, it was very interesting to see. And I know, much like Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, too, food is a big part of the Taiwanese culture. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of scenes around meals at this in this film. And it was also interesting, too, that, like you were mentioning, and Logline did too, it's like a sham relationship where they're pretending that they're together. And there's multiple scenes in the beginning of the film where the tenant, which is the fake wife, basically, or she's pretending to
Mhm.
be the fiance, is faking her own cooking too. Like she's not
Yeah.
actually making, it's the boyfriend who's actually cooking. So when the
Yeah.
dad is sitting down and being like, "Oh, this is such a great meal," and he's complimenting who he thinks is going to be his daughter-in-law, he's actually complimenting his son's boyfriend. And
Yeah.
in a way, I feel like that also brings them closer together. Like the boyfriend sort of hears that as compliments to him, and also validation in a way of like, "Oh, wow, okay, he does like me because he likes my food." And then towards the end of the film, when he actually is cooking for the father can also then thank him more directly. And at that point,
Right.
too, in the plot, the father is revealed that he knew the whole time what was actually going on, and that the boyfriend was the boyfriend and not just a friend who the main character happened to be living with. So I do like how food was woven in terms of the actual machinations of the plot, which I thought was
Mhm.
super interesting. That was a great way to say how food can be bringing people together and what it means to be enjoying someone else's food. And the wedding banquet scene is, again, the highlight of the film, like you
Right.
said. It's a lot of awesome food, just reminding me a lot of big weddings that I've been to where there's been just tons and tons of food, and it's always fun to just see and see all that and be reminded of that. and also all the great food that I've had at different weddings too. So it was, and again, like you said, it shows how important food is for those sort of celebratory events as well. Like you're getting married, and yes, that's important, but what really is important is that everyone breaking bread together, all the friends and the family, and celebrating a couple through food is something that, I think is really important to many cultures, and that's why there's usually feasts at weddings. And then if that's why also food is so important at the wedding, I feel.
I think so too. Very important. Yeah, you're totally right. Like the wedding banquet is amazing itself, but the quieter moments that are peppered throughout the movie where, food is a symbol of love, food, like on the boyfriend's part, it's such a sacrifice on his part, right? To kind of almost pretend that his relationship doesn't exist at all. And they're definitely trying moments for him that he's been sidelined and just pretending and going along with this whole ruse. But what's for him in this whole thing?
Right.
But he keeps coming back by just making food and being part of it all, because he sort of believes in a better tomorrow, and he believes in sort of kindness and respect, because there's a whole other way to deal with this situation, right? Which is that, oh, we're going to stand up against the parents and let them know this is who we are, and you can deal with it. But it's not what you do with the people whom you love. You want to win them over, and sometimes, even though there might be sacrifices involved or lies involved, but you do this because you care. And I think a lot of that is on display just through food. And yeah, those quieter moments in the kitchen between the fake daughter-in-law and the mother, it's also a way for the parents to kind of assess his son's well-being and his son's life, because food is such an obvious way to kind of know if somebody's happy, are they doing well or no, and how can we help, and all of that. So yeah, it's pretty integral, but it's not on the nose. And on Ang Lee, like I wanted this movie here as well, because he's one of those directors who has focused on food in his filmography. You mentioned Eat, Drink, Man, Love. I almost put that on here, which centrally revolves around food. I mean, every primary relationship in that movie is around food. So I always like and keep track of directors, I suppose, who use food as a metaphor. In fact, all the movies on my list have that going on with their directors. They've come back to this theme over and over again.
The theme of food.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I do find that those dinner conversations or even breakfast, like when that family is there at that table, like those scenes are very, very important as the narrative unfolds. And it is just also proof that those conversations are also just important dynamics that you have in your own life too. Like sitting down as a family at the dinner table, that's where you either are putting up a front and trying to lie about something, but then it's kind of obvious. And that's again where I think the father, who is revealed later in the film to have known this is a ruse for a while, I think he just sensed it through the interactions at that table. Like you can't really fake a lot of feelings and things when you are at that kitchen table sharing a meal. It's harder to do that and more obvious, I think, when you are doing that, versus like the wedding banquet. It's easy to get lost in the regalia of, oh wow, of course they're in love, but it's really just about the food and the party and the celebrations. And it's easier, I think, to put on a ruse there in front of all your family and friends in that way than it would be just in front of just your parents and having your secret boyfriend right there. And like those, I think, are the most interesting scenes in the film. And watching them, because there's several of them, maybe 4 or 5 throughout the course of the film, and just seeing the dynamic of how they how they evolve. There's even a big scene when they start arguing in English, the main character and his boyfriend basically admitting to themselves what's going on, and the boyfriend's like, I'm moving out, I can't do this anymore. And they're all able to talk in English, thinking their parents can't understand, though they can. But I think that's again a place where they felt comfortable having that argument at a dinner table versus in a closed room somewhere, which is sort of weird to say that, but at the same time, I do think that when you're sharing a meal, there truths can come out and real discussions can be had more. So.
It's so strange, right? That happens in all of our lives. Like I remember so many moments as I'm talking through this, sitting with parents or sitting with family or friends at home or outside, and things have been stirred up or happy things have happened. There's something about the act of just letting go, letting loose, being served, eating food together, which maybe puts you in a more comfortable space to be you, as opposed to if you were sitting in a living room watching TV, or you're, in any other situation or setting. There's something about eating food, I guess it goes back to the fact that it's so primal, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
what are we on this earth for? We are all animals at the end
Hmm.
of the day. And I don't mean that in an animalistic way, but just that it's a story of survival. And what helps us do that? It's food. So maybe there's something about that. We've been doing this since the beginning of time, sitting around the fire, eating whatever we could scrounge around and making sure that we see the next day.
Right, right. And it's doing that together. I mean, again, we are a
Yeah.
social species too. It's not like we went out into the
Right.
woods on our own and, would be hunting and catch something and just eat it ourselves. Like, no, hunting
Right.
required multiple people. You'd always split the what was caught. Same thing with gathering berries or, things like that during the hunter-gatherer part of our evolution. Those were things we did together, and we also consumed that together. So I think there is something that brings people together, and there's a comfort there that I think this movie does a good job in demonstrating. I mean, I did feel the movie though was pretty dated. Actually, it
Yeah.
felt like a 90s sitcom plot of like,
Yeah.
oh, we're just going to pretend and the parents are coming over and we're pretending that we're engaged and all these sort of things. But then, as the movie gets more and more serious, like it starts off kind of like a lighthearted comedy, and it actually
Yeah.
felt a lot like a 90s rom-com for like especially
Right.
the first act. But then the movie becomes very real and serious when you do
Yeah.
realize, oh, this isn't actually all fun and games. The boyfriend is getting severely hurt in this situation. What is he really gaining out of this? Is it actually good to lie to one's parents like this? And it might be fun at the moment. Oh, yeah, fine. We're just getting married. It's fake. And then, later, what? You have to admit the truth. At some point, you're going to have to the parents or get divorced, which is going to hurt them. And then when the child comes into it too, it just really
Right.
does massively change things when she becomes pregnant in the third act of the film. And it's like all of a sudden the movie becomes super, super serious towards the end, which I think it does well with the tones, but it just for some reason did feel very dated to me. Just the whole premise and the way it was executed. What did you think when you saw it?
I felt similarly, like the premise, but also just the look of it and such.
Yeah.
And some of these things around the settings and the clothes and how people are lit and all of that like really shows. I suppose at the same time, I think the tonal shifts are handled pretty well, and the performances are very, very good. Like it's
you
a
think so?
farce, but it's grounded for the most part.
The acting I thought was a little iffy, especially the non-Asian actors. I felt the English just
I would
not
agree.
Even the boyfriend I didn't think actually was a very good
Boyfriend
actor.
is not good, but to me the principal, like the parents and
the parents are great. Yeah.
Parents are the best part actually from an acting standpoint, I think. Yeah, I agree. But it was a fun one. I wouldn't put this Ang Lee sort of pantheon of movies, but I can see where it all started, right? Like this is why he goes in direct Sense and Sensibility and nails it absolutely, because he has this knack of sort of handling intimate conversations and relationships and dynamics and building character, but also handling a farce or in other movies a supernatural mystical thing like Life of Pi or what have you. Like he can handle kind of multiple layers. Brokeback Mountain again, super intimate. So you see that deftness, and it's probably starts here.
No, I agree. And again, I was just surprised how much this felt like a fully formed 90s romantic comedy, this was in the early 90s when this came out, and it felt like it helped set the template for a lot of the movies that would come after, and not only that Ang Lee would make, but just Hollywood would start producing.
Totally.
I did actually think the ending was a little odd, and I wondered what you thought about how it just resolves at the security checkpoint, and like all of a sudden the movie felt kind of like over, and like no one really seemed happy except for maybe the dad, and then the movie just ended. I thought that was a little odd. Like, were you struck by that too?
Yeah, a little bit, but I also was like, okay, he's trying to go for a very real kind of thing where things don't really get resolved. There's not much said, and maybe it's a little jarring because the premise and is sort of so farcical that you want it to be resolved fully,
right?
But because we spend most of the movie after the first act in this kind of a very real, grounded, and like you said, even a serious tone at points, I think it's fitting that it's not resolved, and it's up to your imagination in terms of what happens, and does the central couple go back to being the way they were, because this was a pretty life-altering thing that they've all gone through, or what happens with this this
Child.
woman and the child
Yeah.
and all of that. Like there's just a lot of things. I mean, you could easily make a sequel, honestly, of this movie, and I wish they had, because there's
Yeah.
so much to explore with what happens with these people.
Yeah, the baby shower banquet, maybe. Because they have to
I
have the kid,
guess.
and then what
I like
happens?
it.
What happens there? But yeah, you're right. I think the first act in the movie is so much a farce and a screwball comedy. Even certain aspects of it come
Right.
across like that, and then the tone shifts very quickly as the movie goes on and gets more and more serious. Especially after the wedding banquet, I feel like that's when things start turning into more of a drama, like a soap opera drama, as opposed to a fun like 30-minute like sitcom plot. And yeah, so you're right. Maybe the ending then is justified based on where the movie ends up, as opposed to where it started, as opposed to some like funny farcical final act. It becomes like much like a telenovela or something towards the end.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also life in a way, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I don't think these people realize at the beginning of the movie that what they were entering in, how serious would that be? And I can kind of relate to that. You know, you live far away from your parents in a different part of the world, and you build your own life, and you almost feel that, oh, they wouldn't understand or realize, and you know, we can just make this happen, and they'll go away in a little bit, and this whole thing will just stay intact, and without realizing what is kind of like a funny joke, farcical thing actually has a lot of bearings. And then you yourself are reminded of where you come from and this part of the world that you've left, and the relationships you have with your parents, and things before you know it creep up on you that this is actually serious. And oh, by the way, the person whom I'm with, he also has feelings, and it's not all just fun and games. So it's sort of true too, in a way, as farcical and soap opera-y it might be.
No, you're right. It's saying that if like farce, at some point you have to pay the piper. Like, yeah, you have these things, but you think there are no consequences. Life has consequences. Real life does. And I think this movie deals with that incredibly well in the second and especially the third act, when it just becomes wow. So you thought this was fun to have a fake marriage just to appease your parents? Well, look at what's actually going to happen, which would probably be what happened in real life, as opposed to when a sitcom, the thing would get wrapped up in 22 minutes and it'd be all everyone laugh at the end. Oh, this is so funny. Ha ha ha. Oh, you're so funny. And then the parents are gone. Like, this is a much more real situation, which is, you know, I think that again, that's Ang Lee's deft touch to this, who is, I think, again, is one of our best filmmakers around.
Yeah.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.